joined now by the host of Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe. He has done a phenomenal job. Writer, narrator, producer, Emmy award-winning, best-selling author. I mean, that's a lot of aspects out here. Mike, we appreciate you coming on, and we were talking about it a little bit earlier. And I was even reading, I think in the Wall Street Journal recently, a story about people who are younger in their 20s starting to embrace plumbing and
Here it
everything
is,
else in
Clay.
a way. Yeah.
It's how Gen Z is becoming the Toolbelt generation.
Are you optimistic, Mike, that a lot of people are maybe stepping into jobs that they didn't foresee 20 years ago, people being interested in?
Well, it's a little early for a victory lap, although I'd love to take one. We've been at this for 16 years now, trying to challenge the idea that the best path for the most people is the most expensive path educationally, and also trying to shine a light on about 10 million open positions right now, very few of which require a four-year degree. These jobs require training, vocational education, trade schools, and so forth. So it's a bit like pushing a boulder up a hill or maybe turning around a tanker, in the middle of the ocean, pick your metaphor. But it takes a long time to challenge those kinds of stigmas and stereotypes that surround the trades. This article got my attention, and everybody on my social pages all tapped me on the shoulder and said, look, this is really encouraging. It's not what a lot of people expect Gen Z to do. Right? This is the generation that is most often targeted as lazy and entitled and spoiled and all this other stuff. But it's like they got the memo and they've looked around and they've seen a lot of diplomas hanging on a lot of walls and concluded quite rightly that it's not necessarily an indication of what you've learned. It's an indication of what you paid. It's a receipt, right? And $1.7 trillion in student loans is no joke. And Gen Z doesn't want any part of it. They want to learn a skill that's in demand. And I think that's good news.
Hey, Mike, where do people who are thinking about this, like how, if you're somebody who's, let's say you're 18, you're senior in high school, and you're considering it, what are some of the pathways? I mean, so is it just applying to trade school, their apprenticeship programs, and how do people learn more about, for example, what would be a particularly in-demand trade in their area or particularly high-paying trade in their area? What are the resources?
Well, you can't possibly screw up by learning how to weld. Welding is like the gateway into the skilled trades. My foundation has trained hundreds of welders. We've helped a couple thousand people get the training they need to start whatever trade they're into. So to answer your question, mikeroweWORKS.org, shameless plug, all kinds of information on my site, along with $1 million right now we're giving away next month in scholarships for trade schools. But there's so many ways to go, Buck. I mean, there are certainly community colleges and there are obvious trade schools all over the place. A lot of big companies today have their own internal programs. When we took shop class out of high school 40 years ago, we really kind of unleashed the Kraken. That decision removed from view so many vocations. And so we went through a period where a lot of millennials didn't even get a look at what work looked like on that side of the workforce anyway. So it's been a long road back, but the resources are all over the place. Companies are falling over themselves to hire. The opportunities to get training are everywhere. I can't overstate it. It's been one of the great unreported stories in my lifetime. The skills gap, 10 million open jobs, all that opportunity sitting around. At the same time, we've been told you're screwed if you don't get a four-year degree. It's literally the opposite.
I think that's so important, Mike, because you mentioned the $1.7 trillion in student loan debt. Let's say there's a 18-year-old who's listening to us right now, and his options are, I can take out tens of thousands of dollars in debt to get an English major. Nothing wrong with that. Degree, which is not necessarily going to lead me towards being better at any particular profession. Or I can go start being a plumber at 18 or 19 years old. You're stacking tens of thousands of dollars in assets, and you're starting off when the college kid's coming out at 22 or 23 in tens of thousands of dollars in debt. You could have tens of thousands of dollars in savings. How much do you think people are now recognizing that? And are people still not aware of how much money there is out there in plumbing or doing electrical work or all these other things? You mentioned welding. What else would you tell people that there is abundant opportunity in if they'll just go grab it?
Electricians. Electricians are in super short supply. Plumbers, steam fitters, pipe fitters, heating and air conditioning guys. I mean, I can't even tell you if you're not making six figures and you're in that space, you're either just getting started or you're unwilling to go to where the work is. But even then, I mean, the work is pretty much everywhere. The trap, Clay, in your question is really the reason that I'm not in politics. I can't I'm sure there are some 18-year-olds listening right now, but I don't know who they are. I don't know what their skills are. I don't know what their attitude is, right? And so much of what our elected officials do, and unfortunately what guidance counselors do, is they paint with a really broad brush. And you wind up hearing from a lot of people who have a certain amount of influence that this is what your kid should do or this is what you should do. And I think it's that tendency to talk in platitudes and paint with a broad brush that's brought us to the place where we are right now. We're still a country of individuals, and your kid, your 18-year-old kid, might very likely be wired in a profoundly different way than mine. So I'm kind of stingy with advice in terms of telling groups of people what to do, but you can't ignore the big trends. You can't ignore 10 million open positions right now. You can't ignore you want to hear some really horrible math? The number that scares me more than 1.7 trillion in student loans is 5. Every year, for every 5 tradesmen who retire, 2 replace them. Now that's been going on for over a decade. And when you start to just extrapolate that out, what you realize real fast is this is not just a conversation about companies who are struggling to recruit talent or kids who are struggling to find a path to prosperity. This is a conversation about how long Clay Travis and Buck Sexton want to wait for a plumber when they need one or an electrician. Every single person listening to this has skin in the game because every one of your audience members shares my addiction to smooth roads and affordable electricity and indoor plumbing and a long list
Yeah.
of other stuff that we've been taking for granted long before Dirty Jobs went on the air. So,
Clay,
uh,
my uncle is a tradesman and a locksmith, like a skilled locksmith. He does specialty stuff for corporations, and my brother-in-law is actually a welder. Carrie's brother's a welder, and one thing I hear from both of them is they just don't have the time to do all the jobs that people want them to do, which is not a thing you
yeah,
often hear from that many folks. Like there's so many offers to do different work in different places that they can't get to it all. So Mike, I
yeah.
mean, I'm experiencing that for my own extended family, what they're seeing out there. I'm just wondering to what degree also when you're the CEO of MikeroweWORKS Foundation, you're encouraging young people to go into this, but entrepreneurship, small business ownership. I mean, it's been my experience from people I know, some of whom have become very successful business owners, that a lot of them start by working for a business in the trades.
And this is part of the sort of the disaster scenario. When we took shop class out, we also impacted um, not just the skilled workforce, but the entrepreneurial gene. The path to a small business so often begins with the mastery of a trade. I mentioned welding before because, you know, I know people who are underwater welders today. They make $300,000 a year. I know others who are TIG welders, who are making 100 grand. And I know some who are making less than that and are basically punching a clock. But the most interesting cohort are the welders who hired another welder or more likely hired an electrician and some HVAC guys and then bought a couple of vans and started a mechanical contracting company. Those guys are everywhere and they are the engine of our economy. And their success stories aren't told nearly enough because they start by doing something that so many parents have come to believe is a vocational consolation prize. I don't want my kid to be a welder. Well, the hell you don't, man. I can give you example after example. And Buck, just a quick sidebar. I don't know if you'll remember this, but I saw you 10 years ago. I think you were filling in for Beck, and
Yeah.
you did a story on one of my favorite stories of all time. Nobody talks about it today, but it was a message to Garcia. It was a story
Yes.
about initiative, and it's a story about work ethic, and it's a story about the willingness to cheerfully take hold of a thing and lift. That's part of this conversation too. And my foundation, we award work ethic scholarships because we're not just looking to fill an existing hole. We're looking to find people who are willing to show up early, stay late, take a bite of the crap sandwich, cheerfully volunteer for whatever task is at hand. That's still for sale. That still works. And if Gen Z is the cohort that steps up to do that with the tool belt and a new understanding of what a good job is, God bless them.
Mike, last question for you. You mentioned parents or grandparents. How much encouragement do you see from them? And I know there's a lot of people out there that are worried their kids are not working hard enough. Maybe they're not making great grades in school, but they do have that work ethic and they're trying to find a way. I think most people have no idea that you can make six figures doing a lot of these jobs. Do you think parents and grandparents are making their kids aware enough of that opportunity as well? Or do you think they've been sold the idea that only success comes through the pathway of college? You can't do anything else.
Again, I hate to paint with a broad brush, but the short answer is yeah. By and large, we have an idea in our head about what a good job looks like. And look, most parents also want something better for their kids than whatever they had. The problem is, what is better, right? I mean, we get to decide how much debt is good. We get to decide if work, for instance, is the proximate cause of our unhappiness. There's a very popular narrative in this country right now that says that it is. That's why you'll see support for Bernie Sanders' 32-hour work week. Crazy, but if you believe in your heart that the reason you're unhappy is because you're working too much, or if you believe, like genuinely believe in your heart that you're going to be happy when you retire, then you've bought into an existing narrative that is, in fact, persuasive. And it's persuasive because it's mirrored constantly in sitcoms and movies and advertisements. We are surrounded by this idea that work is the enemy and that you're a failure if you're a parent if you don't get your kid into a proper school. So, yeah, I would say to parents who believe that, you might be right. Maybe your kid is exactly wired to do all of those things, but you might be wrong. Put all the options on the table, have an honest conversation about the realities of debt and the advantage of learning a skill that's in demand. My final thought is, this. I'm holding my cell phone in my hand right now and I'm looking at it because that is a liberal arts education and it's free. All the information I learned when I was in school in 1984 is right there, man. If you're curious and you really want to learn whatever floats your boat, you can watch a lecture on it right now for free at MIT or Brown or Yale. It's all there. Learn a skill first. Master a trade. Go to work. Get rich.
I think we lost him there for a minute, Buck, but he's mikeroweWORKS, I believe, is the website. Mikerowe.org. He was fantastic. You gave him the last line there, but man, I know people love that. Well,